On the evening of September 14, 1971, 44 people gathered on the back terrace of a rented estate near the top of Mulholland Drive. The house belonged to no one in particular. It had been leased for the season by a production company finishing principal photography on a picture that does not matter to this story. What matters is who stood behind the last row of chairs. Arms folded across a chest the width of a refrigerator door, watching a martial arts demonstration with the flat, unimpressed expression of a man who had ended real fights in real hallways and had decided, long before this evening began, that what he was watching was none of those things. His name was Ray Dalton. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed 350 pounds. He had played defensive tackle at Oklahoma State, where he earned all conference honors in 1962 and again in 1963. After a knee injury ended his draft prospects, he turned to boxing and compiled a record of 14 wins and 2 losses as a regional heavyweight before his corner stopped a fight in Tulsa and he decided the ring was no longer worth the cartilage. He entered private security. By 1971, he had been Clint Eastwood's personal bodyguard on 3 consecutive productions. He had broken a man's jaw in a parking lot in Bakersfield. He had separated a shoulder in the lobby of the Beverly Wilshire, both times on duty, both times with a single strike. He was not theatrical. He was genuinely dangerous. In 11 seconds, he would be lying on his back on imported Saltillo tile, staring up through the branches of a jacaranda tree, trying to understand what had just happened to him. The man who put him there weighed 136 pounds. He had arrived 40 minutes earlier in a dark blue polo shirt and white canvas shoes, carrying nothing, saying very little. He sat 3 chairs from the end of the second row with a paper cup of tea cooling on the flagstone beside his right heel. Most of the people on that terrace had seen his face before without knowing his name. A few recognized him from a television pilot that had not been picked up. 1 or 2 knew him from the tournament circuit. Not a single person on that terrace, with the possible exception of Eastwood himself, understood that they were sitting 9 feet from a man who would become the most famous martial artist in the history of the world. The sentence Dalton would hear from the tile, spoken so quietly that only he and the jacaranda above him would ever know its precise words, would follow him for the remainder of his life. He would repeat it to 3 people across 5 decades and refuse to repeat it to anyone else. But that comes later. The gathering had been organized loosely, in the manner things were organized in that part of the industry in that decade. Eastwood was between setups on a picture shooting across town at Universal. He had mentioned to a producer friend, over lunch at a commissary table that seated 4, that he wanted to see a martial arts demonstration. Something real. Not the choreographed sequences he had watched on sound stages where stuntmen pulled every strike by 18 inches and sold the impact with their shoulders. The producer, a man named Leland Caldwell, had connections to the martial arts community spreading through the canyons and storefront dojos of greater Los Angeles in the early 1970s. Caldwell made 2 telephone calls that afternoon. The first was to a Shotokan instructor in Torrance who agreed to bring 4 of his senior students for a short demonstration of kata and controlled sparring. The second call was to a man in Culver City who said he would come alone. The Shotokan students arrived first. They set up on a section of terrace that had been cleared of patio furniture, bowed in unison, and began a structured demonstration that lasted approximately 18 minutes. They were disciplined. Their technique was sharp, their timing was clean. The audience, largely composed of actors, stunt coordinators, camera operators, and below-the-line crew who had nowhere else to be on a Sunday evening, watched with genuine interest. A few applauded between sequences. Eastwood sat in a low canvas chair near the pool house with a glass of bourbon resting on the flat of his knee, watching with the economy of attention for which he was already known. He missed nothing. He said nothing. Dalton stood behind Eastwood's chair with his arms folded. He watched the Shotokan demonstration the way a structural engineer watches a building that has been painted to look like a different building. He saw the surface. He questioned the load-bearing walls beneath it, in his experience, which was considerable and not dishonest. The men who performed elaborate kicks and spinning techniques in dojos and gymnasiums were not the same men who could finish a confrontation in a hotel corridor at 2 a.m. when the lights were bad and the carpet was wet. He had finished 3 such confrontations himself. None of them had involved a spinning anything. All of them had ended with forward pressure, simple mechanics, and the blunt advantage of mass applied to a single point. His skepticism was not performative, it was structural. He believed what he believed because of what he had survived, and what he had survived had worked every time. The Shotokan demonstration concluded to polite applause. Caldwell stepped to the front of the cleared space and introduced the second guest. He used only a first name and a loose physical description. Most of the audience barely looked up from their drinks. A few shifted in their chairs to find a more comfortable position. The evening felt as though it were winding toward an end. The man from Culver City walked to the center of the terrace in his white canvas shoes and stood with his hands at his sides. He was young, 29 years old, 5 feet 7 3/4 inches tall, a measurement he had given precisely in an interview 2 months prior. His shoulders were not wide, his frame was narrow in the way that suggests either fragility or compression. And the difference between those two things is visible only to people who know what to look for. His forearms were dense with visible tendon, the kind of anatomical detail that reads as decorative until it is applied. He introduced himself quietly, without a title or a credential, and began to explain what he intended to demonstrate. He spoke about economy. He spoke about directness. He spoke about the elimination of what he called classical mess, the accumulated postures and rituals that he believed had turned living combat into dead ceremony. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has thought about a single subject for every waking hour of the past 11 years and has grown weary of hearing it described by people who have not. While he spoke, he moved, not dramatically. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other with a specificity that made the Shotokan instructor, still seated in the front row, set down his water glass with a particular deliberateness and lean forward in his chair. The man from Culver City demonstrated a lead hand strike at 3/4 speed, stopping 6 inches from the open palm of a volunteer, and the sound it made cutting the air was different from the sounds the audience had heard all evening. It was shorter. It carried a different weight. Several people in the back row straightened in their chairs without knowing they had done so. Dalton watched from behind Eastwood's chair. He did not straighten. He did not lean forward. He shifted his weight onto his back foot, which was a thing he did when he was composing a sentence he intended to say out loud. The interruption came between demonstrations. The man from Culver City had paused to take a drink of water and was explaining the mechanical difference between a committed strike and a retracted one when Dalton stepped forward around the right side of Eastwood's chair, into the edge of the cleared space. He did not ask permission. He did not raise his hand. He simply spoke, and because he was 6 feet 4 inches tall and 350 pounds, the terrace fell silent the moment he did. He said the techniques were impressive. He said the speed was unusual. He said it with the measured courtesy of a man who understands that he is a guest in someone else's evening and does not wish to be rude about what he is about to say. Then he said the sentence that would become the reason 44 people remember that night when they would otherwise have forgotten it inside a year. He looked directly at the man from Culver City and said, in a voice that carried to the back row without effort, that Kung Fu was a magic show. He said it was fast hands and camera angles and compliant partners who knew when to fall down. He said he had worked in this industry long enough to know the difference between a man who could fight and a man who could perform, and what he had been watching for the past several minutes was a performance. He said it was a good one. He said he meant no disrespect, but he said it was a magic show. And the word he used was magic, and the word landed on the terrace the way a stone lands on still water. 43 people looked at the man from Culver City. The Shotokan instructor closed his eyes briefly in the manner of a man who has just heard a very particular kind of error. Eastwood did not move. He lifted his bourbon 1/4 of an inch from his knee and set it back down without drinking. Years later, in a conversation reported secondhand by a director who had been present, he would describe his reaction in 5 words. He said he leaned back. If you want to see what happened in the next 11 seconds, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from tonight. The man from Culver City did not respond immediately. He held the paper cup of water in his right hand for 4 seconds, looking at Dalton without expression. Then he bent down and set the cup on the flagstone beside his shoes. He placed it precisely, the way a man sets down something he does not intend to pick up again for a while. He reached down and removed his canvas shoes one at a time and placed them together aligned beside the cup. He was now barefoot on the Saltillo tile. The tile was cool. The temperature at that elevation on Mulholland Drive at that hour in September was 68 degrees. And the tile had been in shade since 4 in the afternoon. He did not stretch. He did not shake out his hands. He did not roll his neck or drop into a fighting stance. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands open at his sides, as unhurried as a man who has been asked a question he has answered before and does not mind answering once more. The recognition moved through the seated rows the way a change in temperature moves through a room, not from front to back, but from the people who understood fighting outward to the people who did not. The Shotokan instructor rose from his chair. Garrett Webb, the stunt coordinator from Eastwood's current production, a man who had staged over 300 screen fights across 14 years, placed his clipboard on his seat and remained standing. Caldwell, the producer, took one measured step backward. One by one, the people on that terrace understood that the small man in the blue polo shirt was not offended. He was not going to argue. He was going to show. He had already decided what would happen. Dalton simply did not know it yet. The man from Culver City said 2 words. He said, "Show me." Then he waited. Dalton stepped fully into the cleared space. He outweighed the man from Culver City by 214 pounds. He stood 7 inches taller. His reach advantage was the kind of advantage that, in a boxing ring, reduces strategy to a single problem the shorter man cannot solve. He settled into the posture of a man who has been in fights that were not demonstrations. Weight forward. Hands raised but not yet clenched, chin lowered behind his lead shoulder. He was not careless. He was not a fraud. He knew how to move his body in the direction of harm. He was simply wrong about one particular thing, and the terrace was about to learn the cost of that specific error. The distance between the 2 men was approximately 9 feet. What needs to be understood about the next 11 seconds is that they did not feel like 11 seconds to anyone present. Garrett Webb would later say that the experience lasted 45 minutes inside his nervous system. The Shotokan instructor described it as watching something fall from a great height in perfect silence. 11 seconds in front of 44 people who understood varying degrees of what they were witnessing became a different substance entirely. 11 seconds on Saltillo tile at the top of Mulholland Drive is a different kind of 11 seconds. Second 1. Dalton moved forward. Not rushing, not lunging, but closing distance the way a large man closes distance when he trusts his size to do half the work. He extended his lead hand in a half-jab, half-rangefinder, the exploratory strike a boxer throws to measure where the other man's head is relative to his own reach. It was technically sound. He had thrown that punch several thousand times across 2 decades. It hit nothing. The man from Culver City was no longer where the punch was aimed. He had moved approximately 14 inches to his right without appearing to shift his weight, without a preparatory step, without bending his knees in the way that telegraphs lateral motion to anyone who has been trained to watch for it. He was simply elsewhere. Dalton's fist passed through the space where his jaw had been and continued forward, carrying Dalton's lead shoulder past his center line by 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches is not a measurement most people would consider significant. In the grammar of what happened next, it was the only measurement that mattered. A fight is not 2 men striking each other. That is what it looks like from the outside, from a camera angle, from a terrace chair with a drink in hand. From inside the exchange, a fight is a negotiation conducted entirely in the language of distance. The man who dictates that distance dictates the terms. Everything that followed in the next 10 seconds was a consequence of 14 inches of lateral movement and the 1.5 inches of overextension it created. The man from Culver City did not need to be stronger. He did not need to be larger. He needed only to understand the conversation better than the other man, and he understood it the way a native speaker understands grammar, without effort, without translation, without pause. Second 2. Dalton reset. He retracted his lead hand, adjusted his rear foot, and threw a right cross. It was harder than the jab. It was committed. It carried the rotation of his hips and the full endorsement of his 214-pound advantage. It was the punch that had broken a jaw in a parking lot in Bakersfield 4 years earlier. The man from Culver City did not block it. He did not parry it. He did not step away from it. He moved his head 3 inches to the left, allowing the cross to pass over his right shoulder so closely that Dalton's knuckles disturbed the collar of his polo shirt, and in the same continuous motion he placed his open left hand on the inside of Dalton's extended right arm, just above the elbow, with so little apparent force that from the third row it might have been mistaken for a social gesture. It was not a social gesture. It was a seal. Dalton's right arm was now extended past his own center of gravity with a hand resting on it like a pin holding open a door that wants to close, and his weight was forward, and his balance depended entirely on his ability to retract that arm. And he could not retract it because 136 pounds of precisely applied knowledge was preventing him from doing so. Garrett Webb had stopped breathing. He would realize this 4 seconds later and take a long, unsteady inhale that the man beside him would recall for decades. Caldwell gripped the back of a wrought iron chair with both hands, pressing so hard that the crossbar left a red imprint on his palms still visible the following morning. The Shotokan instructor had not moved. His expression was not surprise. It was the particular stillness of a man watching something he already believed to be true proven in front of witnesses. Eastwood's bourbon had not moved from his knee. The ice had not shifted. His eyes had not left the cleared space. Second 3. Dalton attempted to recover. He pulled his right arm back against the resistance on his elbow, and when the redirect absorbed that effort, he swung his left fist in a wide hook aimed at the temple of the man who was by now close enough that Dalton could smell the tea on his breath. It was the third attempt. Each had been heavier than the one before. Each had demonstrated real technique, the accumulated instincts of a man who had fought in places where fighting carried consequences beyond a referee's scorecard. None of them had come within 6 inches of their intended target. The left hook traveled approximately 8 inches before the man from Culver City's right hand intercepted Dalton's left wrist, redirected it downward and inward, and used the combined momentum of both failed strikes to rotate Dalton's torso 45 degrees off its center line. Dalton was now facing the wrong direction. His weight was distributed across both feet in a pattern that would have required half a second to correct, and the man standing behind his right shoulder did not intend to give him half a second. Seconds 4 and 5. The man from Culver City swept Dalton's lead ankle with the inside of his bare right foot. The sweep was not hard. It did not need to be. It needed only to be precise, and it was precise to within less than an inch, and 350 pounds of misaligned weight did exactly what 350 pounds of misaligned weight will always do when the single point of support it is depending on is removed from the ground. Physics is not a negotiation. Physics is a verdict. Dalton went down. He fell backward and to his right, and the sound his body made when it struck the Saltillo tile was not a sound any of the 44 people present would later struggle to remember. It was thick. It was final. It was the sound of a conclusion arriving without ambiguity. Seconds 6 through 9. Silence. Nobody on the terrace moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere beyond the estate's western boundary wall, a truck downshifted on Mulholland, and the low grinding of its engine through the eucalyptus trees was the only sound for 3 full seconds. The world continued. Traffic moved along the boulevard below. Light from a neighboring property fell flat across the flagstone and kept falling, indifferent to what had just occurred on the tile 8 feet away. The man from Culver City stood over Ray Dalton with his right foot positioned beside Dalton's left ear and his right hand drawn back to his hip in a fist so tight that the whiteness of his knuckles was visible from the second row. He held that position. He held it long enough for every person on the terrace to understand what it meant. He held it long enough for Dalton, flat on his back, to turn his head and see the fist, and to understand what it meant, and to understand that it was not coming. Seconds 10 and 11. He did not strike. The fist opened, the fingers extended. The hand reached downward, open, palm facing the sky, in the unhurried gesture of a man offering to help another man to his feet. Dalton lay on the tile and breathed. His chest rose and fell with the visible effort of a man whose lungs were working harder than they had worked in several years. The jacaranda above him was motionless. Nothing moved on the terrace except his breathing and the slow unclenching of his own hands at his sides. The man from Culver City leaned down, and he spoke. He spoke at a volume that was not intended for the audience. It was intended for one man. The sentence he delivered from a distance of no more than 16 inches was heard by no one else on that terrace. Dalton would later share its approximate content with 3 people across 50 years and would refuse to share it with anyone else, including his own children. The closest consensus, assembled from those 3 accounts across 3 decades, is that the man from Culver City told him the magic show was finished and that he was welcome to stay for the next one. He held the open hand steady and waited. This is the moment that matters. Not the sweep, not the speed, not the silence that followed. This is the moment that separates what happened on that terrace from every other physical encounter anyone present had witnessed before or would witness after. This is the fork in the road where the story discovers what kind of man it has been telling itself about. Dalton reached up. He took the hand. He allowed a man who weighed 214 pounds less than he did to pull him to his feet, and when he was standing again, breathing hard, tile dust on the back of his dress shirt, a scuff on his left elbow he would not notice until the following morning, he did not offer an excuse. He did not mention the surface. He did not mention the shoes he had been wearing or the angle of approach or the claim that he had not been prepared. He looked at the man from Culver City and said 4 words that Garrett Webb heard clearly and would repeat without variation for the rest of his professional career. He said, "I had that coming." The man from Culver City nodded once. He walked back to his chair, put on his canvas shoes without sitting down, and picked up his paper cup of tea. As he moved through the seated rows toward the edge of the terrace, Garrett Webb reached out and placed his hand on the man's shoulder as he passed. It was a brief gesture, the kind of contact a man makes when he needs to confirm that something he has just witnessed was performed by a physical human being and not by a projection of what he wished a human being could do. Webb said nothing. His hand rested on the shoulder for less than 2 seconds. The man from Culver City glanced at him, nodded again, and kept walking. The gathering dissolved within the hour. People stood in small clusters near the pool house, near the parked cars on the gravel drive, on the flagstone steps leading down toward the road. They spoke in the low, deliberate tones of people who have seen something they need to describe out loud in order to confirm it happened. The story left the terrace the next morning and did not stop traveling. Webb told it to 3 stunt performers on a Western shooting at Paramount before lunch. The Shotokan instructor recounted it to his senior students in Torrance, and within 10 days it had reached 2 dojos in San Francisco and 1 in Honolulu. Caldwell told it over dinner at Musso and Frank to a director who told it to a fight choreographer in Hong Kong who already knew the man from Culver City by reputation and did not need to be told what his hands could do. The story changed as it moved. That is what stories do. They shed the quiet parts and keep the loud ones. In one version that circulated through the stunt community at Warner Brothers, the bodyguard weighed 400 pounds and the man from Culver City had knocked him unconscious with a single kick to the sternum. In another, popular in military combative circles by the late 1970s, Dalton had drawn a knife. In a third version, Eastwood himself had stepped into the cleared space and sparred 3 friendly rounds. None of these versions were accurate. The accurate version was quieter than all of them and more complete, because in the accurate version no one was knocked unconscious, no one drew a weapon, and the man from Culver City did not need to deliver a single full-force strike to any part of Ray Dalton's body. He needed only to remove one ankle from the tile at the precise moment when 350 pounds was depending on it to remain there, and then he needed to let gravity deliver the rest of the argument on his behalf. Eastwood never spoke about the evening publicly. He was asked about the man from Culver City in interviews across 5 decades, and he responded with the brevity for which he became famous. He said the man was legitimate. He said that what the man did was not what other people did. He did not elaborate. Eastwood understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone on that terrace, that the authority of the story lived in what was not said about it. Some events do not require amplification. They require only witnesses, and the witnesses were there, and the witnesses remembered. Dalton continued in personal security for another 19 years. He worked for 2 additional actors and a foreign dignitary whose name he never disclosed. He never again questioned the legitimacy of any fighting discipline in public or in private. In a conversation in 1994, recorded on a handheld tape machine by his nephew and later transcribed for a family collection, Dalton described the evening on Mulholland Drive without exaggeration and without apology. He said that he had been wrong, specifically and entirely wrong. He said the speed was remarkable, but the speed was not the most unsettling part. The most unsettling part, he said, was the stillness beforehand. He said the man had stood so still that Dalton's own nervous system had not registered danger until his body was already in the air. He said it was the single most instructive experience of his professional life, and he said the word instructive with the weight of a man who means it and has thought about it for 23 years. He said the name Bruce Lee the way a man says the name of someone who permanently altered the architecture of his thinking. The man from Culver City died less than 2 years after that evening on Mulholland Drive. He died on July 20, 1973 in Hong Kong at the age of 32, in circumstances that have been examined, disputed, and mourned across every continent for more than half a century. He left behind a body of film work that redefined what a human being could look like in motion. He left behind a philosophy of combat that is still taught in its original vocabulary in gymnasiums on 6 continents. And he left behind a quiet archive of private stories carried from witness to witness through dojos, backlots, military training halls, and Sunday evening gatherings at rented estates, stories that will outlast every frame of celluloid he ever stood in front of, because the thing they describe, the calm and total dismantling of certainty by precision, is too important to allow to disappear and too specific to have been invented. The evening on Mulholland Drive is one of those stories. It was seen by 44 people. Most of them are gone now. But the story remains, handed from one voice to the next, the way all such stories are handed along, accumulating and shedding details with each retelling, surviving because it carries a truth that does not require decoration to be understood. The lesson is plain. It has always been plain. What a man announces about himself and what he can do when the distance between bodies closes to zero are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. The scale on which a man measures his own certainty and the scale on which the world measures his ability are calibrated differently, and the difference between them is invisible until the moment it is not. Until the moment a man is on his back on cool tile, looking up through the branches of a tree he did not notice when he was standing, listening to the quiet voice of someone who offered the truth gently before he offered it physically, and who extended his hand afterward and who waited. Dalton understood this. He understood it in 11 seconds, and he carried that understanding for 50 years. And when he was asked at the end of his life how the experience had felt, he did not talk about the speed or the technique or the embarrassment of landing on his back in front of Clint Eastwood. He talked about the hand, the open hand, reaching down without impatience, waiting without urgency. He said it was the most respectful thing anyone had ever done to him. He said that a man who could have struck and chose not to had taught him more in 11 seconds than he had learned in 14 professional fights and 3 hallway altercations and 46 years of believing he understood what strength was. Next week, we will tell the story of the afternoon Bruce Lee walked unannounced into a closed combative seminar with the United States Marine Corps, and a master gunnery sergeant with 22 years of operational experience told him that no man his size could put a Marine on the ground. That exchange lasted 14 seconds. Subscribe now so you do not miss it.